So this is a crate that I have where I usually will take records that I'm like currently listening to, or I want to, play a little bit more, and I won't put them back on the shelf. I'll throw them into this crate, and it sits really kind of close to my record player so I can kind of quickly grab it. And it's just kind of currently what I'm listening to. Merle Haggard, Back to the Bar Rooms. I love country like this. You can kind of tell what it's going to sound like just off of what it looks like. Otis Redding, the Soul album. This was my first Otis record. I mean, that track list is like incredible. Sometimes you gotta maneuver it. This has one of these kind of covers like this cheap plastic, where sometimes I'm a little conflicted whether or not I should take it off because it's part of the record, but I hate when they write the price tag. Like, how do you take that off? Treasures Untold, early recordings of Lefty Fritzl. I got this at a flea market for a few bucks. It's just old country. Lightning Hopkins, Country Blues. Neil Young, Decade. Triple disc, career retrospective of mostly his earlier kind of recordings and stuff like that. Jazz a la Midnight. And I kind of think that maybe it's time to kind of an old, very old case. Real smooth piano, kind of dope late night jazz. The Fabulous Johnny Cash. I got this for 12 Canadian. I got this in Montreal. My Airbnb actually had a record player, so when I play this, it just takes me back because I listened to it the entire time I was out there while I was working on an album called Lo-Fi Travel Tapes, now available on Spotify. Raekwon, Only Built for Cuban Links. I bought this off of just somebody who had a whole bunch of records at a flea market for $1, and I'm looking through and it was just all stuff like this. But a lot of them had the records missing on the inside. Jim Jones, On My Way to Church. I love the production on this album. A lot of heat makers. Super soulful, lush. I mean, it's just, this is really what I listened to a lot heavily in high school. Genius of Ray Charles. I mean, look at this. How are you going to pass that up? It's Atlantic. Atlantic released a lot of great jazz, a lot of just great albums. Dave Brubeck's greatest hits. Take 5. I think Take 5 is the highest selling jazz record song of all time. I love that hat right there. It'd probably make a dope tattoo. The Incredible Jazz Guitar of Wes Montgomery. I've sampled this before. This is just an incredible album. Super smooth, just jazz guitar. I mean, it says it right in the cover, right? Incredible Jazz Guitar. Marvin Gaye, Let's Get It On. I mean, classic. You already know. It doesn't require much explanation. If you only know Marvin Gaye from the song Let's Get It On, check it out. At his creative peak. I mean, look at that energy right there. You know what I mean? So, John Coltrane, My Favorite Things. Probably a top 3 jazz album of all time. I mean, people much smarter than me will probably be able to explain it a little bit better. But this is just really, 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 really good. And if you're like not a real big jazz fan, you really whatever, just try this one. This is a great one to start with. This is Sports Spirits by Sports Coach. He's a super good friend, and this is just an incredible lo-fi album. A lot of synthesizers recorded on tape, a lot of natural sound, just like a really dope. I feel like when people hear lo-fi, at least in the new definition of it, they think strictly hip-hop beats, but this is just an incredible album and a lo-fi album in a totally different genre of like dream pop, and it's just like super, it's just a really lush kind of very creative album considering there was no computers, everything was done and recorded live, and it's just like an incredible album by a super cool dude. I mean, this also requires no explanation. Jay Dilla, aka JD Donuts. I don't know what release this one was. It's not, I don't think it's the very first one, but like if I were to have to grab one record out of my entire collection, it'd probably be this. It definitely should be in every beatmaker's collection. It didn't invent the wave, but it set it off and it took it to another level where I feel like a lot of mainstream publications started kind of really realizing the genius behind producers and stuff like that, and how they can stand on their own and just their own beats and their own music can just be the thing, Bobby Caldwell. Let's try that again. This was like a white dude who, I mean, if you don't know about him, he was like a white dude who was super soulful, and it kind of seems like the label didn't really want to push him as a white dude because his voice was just so strong and soulful that they sort of, I feel like, kind of tried to hide that he was white by always casting him in shadow. I think a few of his album covers are like this. This is the only one that I own. I mean, he is super popular now, especially amongst crate diggers. He's been sampled by Tupac, Jay Dilla. Just an incredible, incredible artist. I wish I had more of him, but I really hate when albums do this, where it's just nothing. You know, like, what is this? What group is this? There's so many albums that are like that. Oh, another Johnny Cash, looking very handsome. Got this at a flea market. Somebody had a old record stores, just new old stock, like unopened stuff. So, hey, here's another Johnny Cash. This is sealed still, and again, this is what I'm saying about old new stock or new old stock, that this is unopened from a record store. The guy had pretty much the entire record store's collection, just all unopened things, and I feel like I should have bought all of them, because unopened, that no matter what, unopened and old is very rare. So they all, a lot of them have this weird little slice thing in there. I don't know why this is done, but I have a bunch of records like that. Maybe it's just to show that it wasn't stolen, or I don't know, but Little Sister Reba Green. I mean, hey, it's a Sunday morning. You got a little cup of coffee. You're gonna put on some on a Sunday. You put on a little gospel. Like, you can't go wrong. Honestly, this is just one very long prayer set to gospel music, but from like, I feel like maybe the '60s. It was recorded in Philly, but this is super dope. Really nice vibe. I haven't been able to sample it yet, but I'm going to. Just a bunch. I mean, it's honestly the ones in the back here are just like random ones, a little Elvis Costello, some hip hop singles, but that's kind of basically everything that I've been listening to the last couple weeks. This is just this dope 45 holder from, I think, maybe the 50s that I got at a flea market. I just love it. The buckles, everything, the colors. You can see here it was made in Brooklyn, probably Carroll Gardens, genuine Carroll product, but it's just gorgeous. Anything that's in this box too is like my most favorite personal prized collection is all inside of here. I just love all the 45s, and I kind of just put it in this special place just so I know that anything that's in here is gonna be, for me, a classic. And a lot of these 45s came from going to flea markets and seeing Curtis Mayfield, James Brown in the boxes and asking them how much, and they'll tell me, oh, they're 25 cents each, they're 50 cents each. So I just said, here, take a $20 bill and just give me the whole box. All right, so we've seen enough 45s now. Now let's take a look and see what it takes to play them. Here's a speaker that I literally found in the trash. You know, with the old records, with dust, I mean, with a cat, you gotta give things a wipe down every once in a while just to keep it kind of crisp. This is a 45 adapter, you know, so that your record player can play those little records with the big hole. And then don't forget, put it at 45 RPM. All right, we're gonna lift the needle up. And I don't do this with all my 45s, but I do it with my 12 inches, but you know, you give it a dusting, a brushing, whatever, get the surface dust off of there. I mean, my 45s are so dirty because they've just been in boxes for years, but they still rock. Now, a common complaint that I hear about vinyl is that you have to stop what you're doing and kind of flip it over, and that's even worse with 45. So I'm going to show you this record player that I have. I bought off eBay a few years ago, and it kind of helps alleviate that problem and just sort of, it helps you kind of make a playlist just off of 45s. So this is, I think, a GE Wildcat or something like that, but these were super popular record players in the 60s and 70s. You can find them pretty cheap on eBay. I think I paid 40 bucks, but they're automatic record players, and they have these adapters that I just put in there. And with that adapter, you can stack a good amount of 45s just right on it. It takes a little bit of finesse, to be honest. I mean, I feel like they're not professional grade things, you know, they were just made for the home consumer, but once you kind of get it on there, you're able to stack an incredibly, probably about 8 or 9, maybe even 10 45s. Here you can see I have some pennies taped to the arm just to kind of stop it from skipping. I don't know if it's just mine, but when I first got it, by default it was very skippy, but the pennies definitely help. That's kind of like an old school DJ trick. I really love the lever on the right side there where you can kind of reject the record and it'll just go right to the next one. Like, are you kidding me? How could you not like that? And with that, I think we're gonna call it an episode. This has been Vinyl Hang with me, Bird Boss. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for chilling. Hope you learned a little something. And catch me on the next episode. So we begin with Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday. Now, this song was recorded in 1939, but it was actually written in 1937 by a Jewish poet named Abel Meeropol. And it was a protest song against the American racism that was happening at this time, and particularly lynching of black Americans that were reaching its peak in the South. At this time, it was called the Declaration of War, and it sort of sparks the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. The song was inspired by a horrific photo of the public lynchings of both Thomas Shipp and Abraham Smith, and they were accused of murder and rape the night before they were killed. But it turns out that the woman who said she was raped later on her deathbed said that she made the whole thing up. It's a horrible photo, but an incredibly powerful, moving song, and an incredible moment for the life and career of Billie Holiday, and I think this is her defining song. And yeah, I suggest you go check it out. So next up, we have Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. It was recorded on March 2nd and April 22nd, 1959 in New York City. That album features John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley on saxophone, Bill Evans on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, Jimmy Cobb on drums, and a brief appearance by Wynton Kelly on piano. Now, it's seen as not only the greatest jazz album ever recorded, but also one of the best and most influential albums of all time. Most of the album was improvised, and the only notes that the players received were extremely rough sketches, and it was basically written hours before it was recorded. And it's kind of crazy to think that this idea that pops into your head ends up becoming one of the most iconic things in any genre in history. So I love this album. It's a reissue. It's been reissued countless times, and I highly recommend picking it up. If you're just getting into vinyl, this is the quintessential first record that you should have. Now, next up, we have my Italian bootleg version of Blonde by Frank Ocean. Now, I have the bootleg version because the original version was released in extremely limited numbers, and it goes for almost $1,000 right now on eBay. I don't know if I'll ever be able to own the original, but luckily I have this sort of deluxe edition bootleg, and I think that's kind of enough for now. I really do love this album though. So this was released on August 20th, 2016, exactly one day after he released his experimental visual album Endless. It was teased for over 3 years before finally releasing. It was recorded at the iconic Electric Lady Studios in New York City, Abbey Road Studios in London, and Henson Recording Studios in Los Angeles. Now, this album is a whirlwind of experimental and abstract R&B, avant-garde soul, and psychedelic pop. It deals with themes of masculinity, sexual experiences, heartbreak, loss, and trauma. It was named the 2016 Album of the Year by Time Magazine, and Pitchfork actually named it the best album of the decade. And this has gained an insane cult-like following. I mean, the people who are into Frank Ocean, and in particular this album, I mean, they don't just like it, they love this album, they live for this album. And I'm kind of one of those people. I've gone through extremely hard times in my life with this album. It's almost as the kind of rock that I needed at this time. And still to this day, when I'm in the mood for a good cry, when I really feel that I've been holding in something, I'll put this album on, kind of get under the covers and just sort of let it go, you know? And I think that's really important, and I'm kind of really just grateful for this album. Next up, we have Hot Buttered Soul by Isaac Hayes. Now, this was released sometime in June 1969, but I couldn't find the exact release date. Now, the album and what makes it unique is that it really is just 4 tracks, but they're all extremely lengthy, with a cover of Jimmy Webb's By the Time I Get to Phoenix clocking in at almost 19 minutes. Now, this is a follow-up to a disappointing debut album by Isaac Hayes, but there was a crisis at his label which allowed him to kind of record a second album with complete creative control. And with nothing to lose, he recorded this alongside Memphis, Tennessee's The Bar-Kays as his backing band. Now, this album combines the classic backbeat of the Bar-Kays that they were famous for, with more aggressive rock guitar sounds and thumping bass and a full orchestra behind it. And it's an incredible album and really highly recommended. Next up, we have the debut album by Jimi Hendrix titled Are You Experienced? Now, before this album came out, he was basically just a struggling R&B studio musician, but a couple chance encounters with some people, including Keith Richards' wife at a nightclub in Greenwich Village, New York City, basically got him the opportunity to move to London and create a band and make this album. This was recorded October 66 to April 67 and released May of that year, very shortly after it was finished recording, actually. It was an immediate critical and commercial success, and it's basically seen as one of the greatest debut albums of all time. I mean, each track has its own personality, from R&B to free jazz to psychedelic rock to blues, and it kind of is just one of those albums that you see it a lot. It has an iconic cover, but it really is worth giving a second glance if you haven't. I put this album off for a long time just because it was sort of everywhere, kind of, I don't know, I felt like I experienced it before I ever even heard it. But I'm glad I gave it another chance because it truly is incredible, especially for a debut. Next up is Otis Redding's The Dock of the Bay, also known as Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Now, I'm mostly just going to talk about this song because back then, albums were still being released sort of as compilations of singles versus cohesive albums. And not all albums, it depends on the label and the artist, but it was kind of a trend back then. So this song was recorded actually just a few days before his untimely death. He died in a plane crash, I believe, in 1968. Now, Otis wrote this song mostly while he was living on a rented houseboat somewhere in Southern California. He wanted to change his style up a bit, and he really doesn't have many songs like it. It's mostly just a very laid-back track with him and a guitar. He never was able to finish the final verse, which is why he has that whistling section at the end of the song. And it actually really makes the song a lot better. It's one of the more memorable parts of the song. It's an incredible song, and it was one of his biggest hits, and unfortunately, he died before it was released. Next up, we have the epic Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. And when I say epic, I mean this was a massive double album along with a 4-track EP that came out on the side. And if you can believe it, it was actually the 18th album by Stevie Wonder. It was released September 27th, 1976, but by 1974, he was already one of the most successful musicians on earth. There was even a massive bidding war between pretty much all the major labels around this time, but he ends up re-signing with Motown for a 7-year, 7-album, $37 million deal, which would actually make it the largest recording contract of all time at that time. Now, the themes on this album are childhood memories, first loves and loss, faith, racism, social justice. And this album spent 13 weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200, and it also won Album of the Year at the 1977 Grammys. This is basically just seen as probably the greatest album ever recorded. It's not crazy to claim that. This album is really critically and commercially seen as just one of the biggest ever released. What I really love about this album also is that it contains this sort of 24-page kind of lyric book. And these little things is kind of what makes vinyl worth it to me. It's just the little extras, the little physical, tangible things that bring the album out from your speakers and sort of brings it into the real world. And you could sit and read along to the songs and whatnot. And it's just kind of really cool. I love this type of stuff. Next up, we have this dope double album compilation thing that I received for a birthday one year by Muddy Waters. Now, he was born April 4th, 1913, but that's really inconclusive and nobody knows when or where he was born. I guess that's not really weird for the time period. They didn't really keep records to that extent, but we do know that he was raised on a plantation in Mississippi. So his nickname comes from his grandmother, who said that he used to like to jump and play in the mud, so hence the name Muddy Waters. He moved to Chicago shortly after being recorded for the first time by the National Registry of Recording or something like that. I mean, that was the first time he ever heard himself recorded, and he loved it, and he believed in himself so much that he moved to Chicago shortly after that. So in 1943, he started playing at different clubs around the city, but the problem was that he was still playing with an acoustic guitar, and no one could really hear you with an acoustic. Hence why he ended up with an electric guitar and with an amplifier, and it's a good thing that he did because it became his signature sound, and through that he really became the godfather of Chicago blues. So here we have the 1972 album by Al Green called Let's Stay Together. Now, his previous album wasn't a super big success or anything like that, but starting from this album onward, for the next 6 albums actually, everything he released shot straight to #1 basically. And this has his only #1 pop hit in Let's Stay Together. I mean, the legacy of that song is unquestionable. You still hear it today in movies and TV show, and it probably is overall the greatest slow jam ever released. Now, I had a few more albums like Nas' Illmatic that I wanted to discuss, but I figured let me maybe save that for another episode so we can give the proper time to What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. So this was released in 1971 at the tail end of a really deep, dark, depressing era for Marvin. He, in the 60s, had reached the highest of highs in the pop music world, but he was also heavily addicted to cocaine. He was having a lot of issues with his ex-wife, and his longtime singing partner was actually dying of a brain tumor. So after her untimely death, he had kind of removed himself completely from the spotlight. He started growing his beard out and wearing more kind of sweatpants. He definitely was ditching the suits that he was known for. The concept of this album and the song came from one fateful night that he was driving around, I think, with the Four Tops after a tour stop, and they witnessed firsthand police brutality happening at Berkeley's People's Park.
It shook Marvin up so much that he literally asked himself, what's going on? What's going on here? So after that fateful night, he kind of started incorporating more of these political themes into his music. And they recorded the song, and when he brought it over to Berry Gordy's office, his label head and founder of Motown, Berry Gordy said that it was the worst song he's ever heard in his life. Now, you have to kind of forgive Berry Gordy for this time period because Marvin Gaye was not known for political songs. He was a pop artist making love songs for years, for decades. So for him to suddenly turn around in 2 years with a whole beard and a completely different look and a completely different sound was probably extremely scary to someone such as his label manager. But he actually was able to get the song released sort of low-key by someone that worked at the label. They were able to press up a bunch of records and they shipped them out to record stores without any knowledge of the actual record label. So after this happened and it was such a success, they said, okay, we're going to give you 30 days to complete whatever album you're working on. And there was no guarantee that they were going to release it, but they sort of wanted Marvin to get this phase out of his system so he could go back to making the pop hits that he was famous for. So this is the first album where Marvin Gaye was credited as the executive producer, and you can really tell that this is something that was near and dear to his heart that he's wanted to do for a very long time. So when the album was released, it was almost immediate a critical and commercial success. I mean, it shot straight to #1. He was sort of creating this vibe where the songs didn't end or start. They sort of flowed into each other in a real sweeping, lush way. That was an original idea and concept at the time. And it has this overarching storyline of a Vietnam veteran returning home to a country that's riddled with hatred, social injustice, police brutality, drug abuse, something that to this day still resonates. This album really stands the test of time too because it's dealing with issues that we still deal with today in 2020, and he was even one of the first artists to openly talk about environmental change and climate change, and it really was not a thing that people really spoke of at the time. So he was really hip to that, and it's super interesting just to hear something that was made so long ago, but it's still so relevant to our current era. This is my absolute favorite Marvin Gaye album, maybe my top 5 albums of all time. It's truly a masterpiece, and it belongs in everyone's collection. If you don't have a record player, then by all means, give it a shot or give it a listen on Spotify or YouTube, because it really is an incredible listening experience.
So on this week's episode of Vinyl Hang with me, Bird Boss, we're going to be looking at some 45s and seeing if we can find any samples that maybe we can make some beats out of at a later date. The sampler that you see at the bottom before we begin, that's where I'm going to be storing all the samples that I find that I feel like could be used at another time. So whenever you see that screen light up and say REC, that means that it's recording whatever you hear so that we can make beats out of it when we're ready to make beats.
Sometimes I'm right, and I can be wrong. My own beliefs.
Yeah, Don McLean, American Pie. I mean, there's really nothing I could do with that. I really like the little drums on this track, so I'm just going to record it here. Now I know this sounds incredibly hectic, but I feel like this could make a really cool intro for a track.
So let's just go for it, and let's see if maybe we could use it at a later time.
Do you recall the night? That very, very special night. Remember a girl? Special.
How can you look me straight in the eye and say I should try? No, you don't understand the feeling that I get. No, you.
So this 45 is actually completely cracked. I mean, if you can see, I don't know if it's gonna focus, but it's like almost cracked all the way down to the center. But I think if we kind of just put it together with our fingers, just want to apologize, my hands are so dry for some reason, but if we, yeah, my nails too, but I think it should be able to still go. I mean, this is just an example of a song that is just way too popular and honestly too good to sample. I don't like to sample things that are so absurdly known. I mean, this is one of the greatest songs of all time. Rest in peace, Bill Withers. So I was thinking maybe I could get some of the claps or the stomps, but it's just every element of the song has been used, so let me just let it chill. Over time, you kind of just develop a sort of sixth sense. I can already hear where the drums are going to be, how I'm going to chop it. It's already there in my head. Whoa, that's me realizing I didn't even know I had this on 45. But that concludes this week's episode of Vinyl Hang. It is a two-parter. This is to be continued. So tune in next week and we're going to see what exactly it is that I make using all these dope samples that I found. Thank you for watching. This is Bird Boss. So here I'm just gonna chop, I believe it's a Blue Magic sample, but in my head when I first listened to the sample, I kind of already had an idea of what I wanted to take out and what I wanted to use. So I'm just gonna take a few minutes here real quick and just kind of chop it up into the way that I kind of want it in my head. So here I'm gonna play back and record the sample chops that I just did. There's no help right now from the sampler, it's just me and my own natural rhythm. And although that's imperfect, it kind of is what gives it the loose feel and the looseness of it. So I really like that some of the notes come in early, some come in late, but it's still all on beat, and it gives it this kind of natural, loose rhythm that it's kind of hard to recreate, you know, it's coming from within. Now let's do a little bit of light mixing. Let's make sure that this drum, this kick is sounding right, that it's all blending together nicely. Now, a lot of people complain that it's hard to get perfect loops manually the way that I'm doing it, and I don't find it that hard, but I do have to go back here and just edit my loop because it was not really, it's not that I want it perfect, but it was just a little bit off beat where it was looping. It's not too hard, it just takes a little bit of practice. It's sounding good so far, but that snare drum still sounds a little hollow, a little flat. So I'm gonna add some more drums, so just to kind of fill it out a little bit. And again, if I hadn't recorded that snare correctly before, then I'd be trying to build on an offbeat snare, and that's really tough.
Thank you.
So usually I'll start finishing my beats off by adding a little bit of texture just to fill in the space in between all the drum sounds and the samples. It kind of rounds everything out, warms everything up, and adds a little bit more, I don't know, just flavor. So to recap, I heard a sample that I really liked. I heard a part of it that I thought that I could take, cut, edit, manipulate, and that's what I did. You saw me take that, you saw me make that into a loop and add the kick and the snare. Now those kicks and snares, those are there. I cannot go back and edit them. So I took my time to make sure that they were on beat the first time, that they were sounding good the first time. After that, I added a little bit more texture, a little bit more percussion, the crowd sounds, I added my bird sounds, and now I'm gonna record it into the other sampler to kind of downgrade it to make it sound a little bit warmer and crunchier, and here's the beat. $185.50 with the $3 shipping. I don't know why they couldn't just do it for free. ASAP Rocky, Live Love ASAP. I love this album, but this is actually an unofficial release. It's a little bit overpriced for a bootleg, but shout out, it's a great album. I don't know about no 185 though. $204.72 for Radiohead OK Computer. This looks like it's the first pressing. This is obviously one of Radiohead's greatest albums, one of their biggest albums. I mean, everybody knows at least the words OK Computer, even if you don't know anything about this band. Velvet Underground and Nico, you got the Banana album. This is a classic. It's the original one. I think the original one too, you could peel that banana off. I think it was just a sticker. $199 for Young Thug. I'm a big Young Thug fan, but I don't know, this seems a little bit overpriced. I don't know how limited this is. It could be one of these like Urban Outfitter exclusive type joints, but White Stripes Elephant, $208 plus another $40 for shipping. This is a incredible album. It's sealed. It looks like it's an original. Makes sense. White Stripes, they have a huge fan base, so I could see why somebody would spend that much money on this. Kid Cudi, $250 for Passion, Pain, and Demon Slaying. I've heard this album like once or twice. I'm not a huge Kid Cudi fan, but I know people are into it. I wonder if this is the album that everybody said kind of sucks. I'm not sure, but $255 for the Shins Oh Inverted World. I think this is the one that they used for the movie Garden State. Pretty surprising that something that is kind of this recent is going for that much. I thought this was way more common, but this is the original. So Microphones, The Glow. If you're into lo-fi, honestly, this is a very dope lo-fi album. It's lo-fi ambient folk. If you're trying to catch a different type of texture and vibe, check this album out. West Side Gun, $257.75. I think this is produced by Alchemist, and they do something really interesting where Alchemist just kind of presses up his own records, super limited. Yeah, very hard to get. So, and this is actually a pre-order. Lost in Translation, $226 and change plus another $40 for shipping. Damn, That's a lot. And this is not an original. This is a Record Store Day re-release, but you know, cult classic of a movie and the soundtrack. Joy Division, $278 plus $15 for shipping. Everybody knows, at least if you don't know this band, you know that image. It's iconic. I love this album. I've kind of given up finding it in the wild, but Mariah Carey, Rainbow, $285. Damn, people must really love this album. When I see it, I look and it just reminds me of 8th grade, being a kid, you know, good summer vibes. $285 though is pretty nuts. Aaliyah, $254 and plus $40 shipping. Honestly, this is one of my grails. I would love to find this. I can't even really find this on CD in the wild. It's not on Spotify. This is an incredible album. I had it when I was a kid. Taylor Swift, $300. Would you pay $300 for a Taylor Swift? I don't know. This is a Record Store Day. They were limited, but it's not that limited. They made 3,700 of them. But, I mean, she has a massive fan base, so it makes sense. My Bloody Valentine, $380. I did see this in the wild, I think at Turntable Lab in New York. It wasn't that expensive, but great album. Their best album, so. Now, next up is this Frank Ocean Channel Orange. It says rare limited edition, but this is actually a bootleg, and I saw this for $40 at Turntable Lab, so I'm really surprised that this sold for $390 for a bootleg. And this is an official. This is $447 for the official Endless album. Not available on Spotify. Not easily available on streaming services. So, you know, it's Frank Ocean. He's kind of killing it as far as vinyl record prices are. Now that's what I call music. This is a collection, 20 records. I didn't even know, not that I didn't know, but I didn't realize that the Now series went that far back. But if you want all of them, this is a little under $400. Britney Spears, Baby One More Time, that classic, iconic cover, almost $600 this sold for. I think that this is a re-release. This is not the original. I think this might be a Record Store Day release. $617, Jay-Z, Reasonable Doubt. Now, I'm kind of a little bit skeptical about this because I did buy this album once in Toronto, and it ended up being a bootleg, which was very messed up. And I mean, if this is original, it's very rare. Misfits, $1,000 plus another about $40 for shipping for a Misfits first pressing, iconic group, but damn, that's a lot for a 7-inch. Next, we got Bon Iver, $1,000 for, I'm assuming this is one of the original pressings. I have an original pressing too, but not the yellow one. But damn, $1,000 for this album. And not surprisingly, the most expensive recently sold album on eBay, Frank Ocean Blonde. I will never hold this album truly in my hands, but I have the bootleg, so I'm happy.
Many a tear has to fall, but it's all in the game.
Sometimes this year, didn't seem possible.
Scarlet covered rainbow, but I just can't find the words to say I love you, girl. But a silent voice inside of me says I do. My mind. Well, hello there.
We're here, vinyl hang at the New Meadowlands Flea Market. Hopefully we'll be able to find some records. It's pretty packed, but we'll see what happens. That's insane.
Oh, John Dever Steinberg.
Well, we just finished up at the flea market. It was about 100 degrees, but I did get a whole bunch of records. Also got this great stool. Boom. So overall, successful day.
Sad news every day.